Have you ever cared about someone so deeply that when they betrayed you, something inside you changed? Not just sadness, not just disappointment, something colder. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped reaching out first. You stopped giving people endless chances. And slowly, the part of you that used to care so much began to disappear. But maybe it didn't disappear completely. Maybe it went into hiding. Most people think kind people become cold because the world made them cruel. But Carl Jung would see something much deeper. He believed that every person carries a hidden side, a shadow, made of everything they were forced to suppress, deny, or bury in order to survive. And for kind people, the shadow often begins with pain. Because the kindest people are usually not weak. They are often the ones who felt too much, forgave too much, understood too much, and stayed too long in places where their softness was used against them. They gave warmth to people who only took from them. They gave loyalty to people who betrayed them. They gave understanding to people who never tried to understand them back. And at some point, the mind learns. It learns that being open can be dangerous. It learns that love can be used as a weapon. It learns that kindness, without boundaries, becomes self-destruction. So the person changes. They become quieter, harder to read, less available, more distant. And the world looks at them and says, "You became cold." But Jung would not see this as a simple change in personality. He would see it as the collapse of a role. Because many kind people do not only act kind, they become trapped inside the identity of being kind. The good one, the patient one, the forgiving one, the one who understands, the one who does not complain, the one who carries everything because everyone else expects them to. And at first, this identity can feel meaningful. It gives them a place in people's lives. It gives them approval. It makes them needed. But slowly, the role begins to demand more than it gives back. Carl Jung called this social role the persona. The persona is the mask we wear so we can function in society. It is not always fake. Everyone has one. You cannot show every thought, every emotion, every wound, and every impulse to the world without consequences, so the mind adapts. It learns what is acceptable. It learns what is praised. It learns which parts of you receive love, and which parts create discomfort. For a kind person, the persona often becomes the mask of the infinite giver. The person who is always emotionally available, always soft enough to forgive, always strong enough to carry pain, always understanding enough to excuse what others do. But this is where the danger begins. Because if a person is praised only when they are useful, patient, and easy to love, they may begin to believe that their value depends on staying that way. They do not ask for much because asking feels selfish. They do not express anger because anger feels ugly. They do not set boundaries because boundaries feel like betrayal. They do not leave because leaving feels cruel. And over time, what looked like kindness may become a psychological contract. I will keep abandoning myself as long as it keeps me accepted. This is not true kindness anymore. This is survival wearing the face of goodness. And many kind people do not realize this because the world rewards the mask. Families reward the child who causes no trouble. Friend groups reward the person who always listens but rarely needs to be heard. Relationships reward the partner who forgives everything and calls it love. Workplaces reward the one who takes on more than they should, stays quiet, and does not make demands. Society calls this maturity, loyalty, compassion, and strength. But Jung would ask, what happens to the parts of the person that are not allowed to exist inside this role? Where does the anger go when they smile through disrespect? Where does the resentment go when they keep forgiving someone who never changes? Where does the exhaustion go when they are always expected to understand but rarely understood in return? It does not disappear. It enters the shadow. The shadow is not only evil, as people often imagine it. The shadow is everything the person has rejected in order to remain acceptable. For a kind person, the shadow may contain anger, pride, suspicion, selfishness, the desire to say no, the desire to stop caring, the desire to finally choose themselves without explaining why. This is why the kindest people often carry a shadow much heavier than others realize. Not because they are secretly cruel, but because they have spent years burying the instincts that could have protected them. A person who believes they must always be good will suppress every thought that feels bad. A person who believes they must always be understanding will suppress every moment of judgment. A person who believes they must always be forgiving will suppress the part of them that knows someone does not deserve another chance. But the psyche cannot live forever by cutting itself in half. At some point, the buried self begins to return, not as a calm realization at first, but as discomfort, irritation, emotional numbness, sudden distance, a loss of patience that surprises even them. They may hear the same apology they once accepted, but now it feels empty. They may see the same behavior they once excused, but now something in them refuses to soften. They may look at someone they once tried so hard to keep and realize they no longer have the energy to chase them. This is not always hatred. Sometimes it is the shadow finally saying what the persona was never allowed to say: enough. And this is the first real truth behind why kind people become cold. They are not always losing their kindness. They are losing the mask that forced their kindness to become endless. The warmth did not vanish, it became guarded. The love did not die. It stopped offering itself without discernment. The patience did not disappear. It finally met a boundary. And to people who benefited from the old version of them, this looks like cruelty. But from the inside, it feels like a person waking up from years of self-abandonment. The reason this role becomes so dangerous is because the mind cannot keep suppressing itself without consequence. When a person keeps being the good one, the patient one, the forgiving one, something has to be sacrificed for that image to survive. Anger must be pushed down. Disappointment must be explained away. Needs must become quiet. Boundaries must be delayed. And the desire to finally say, "I am tired of carrying this," must be treated like a betrayal. But Jung would say that whatever you refuse to face does not disappear. It enters the shadow, and from there, it begins to influence you in ways you may not understand. For many kind people, this begins long before adulthood. Some learned very early that love was not freely given, but earned. They were loved when they were helpful, quiet, agreeable, impressive, obedient, or emotionally easy to manage. They learned that being difficult created distance, but being useful created closeness. So without realizing it, they began to build their identity around being easy to love. They became the responsible one, the good daughter, the good son, the friend who always understands, the partner who forgives, the one who does not ask for too much. But what looks like kindness from the outside can sometimes be a survival strategy on the inside. Psychology calls one version of this the fawn response, the instinct to stay safe by pleasing, appeasing, and becoming what others need you to be. And if you recognize yourself in this, ask yourself honestly, were you really choosing kindness freely? Or were you afraid of what would happen if you stopped being useful? Were you patient because you were at peace, or because conflict felt dangerous? Were you forgiving because the person deserved another chance, or because leaving made you feel guilty? These questions are uncomfortable because they reveal the hidden fear beneath a lot of self-sacrifice. Sometimes people do not keep giving because they are endlessly loving. Sometimes they keep giving because, deep down, they believe love will disappear the moment they stop. This is where self-silencing begins. The kind person learns to swallow the truth before it becomes a problem. They say, "It's fine," when it is not fine. They laugh when something hurts. They soften their opinions so no one feels attacked. They avoid asking for more because they fear sounding demanding. And slowly, they become strangers to their own inner life. They know how others feel. They know what others need. They know how to calm the room, how to read someone's mood, how to prevent tension before it happens. But they no longer know what they want, what they feel, or where their own limits are. This is why kindness can become exhausting. Not because kindness itself is wrong, but because constant self-suppression burns through the soul. Imagine someone like the responsible one in a family. Everyone trusts them because they never fall apart. They answer the calls, they solve the problems, they listen to every complaint, they carry every emotional crisis. People praise them for being strong, but no one asks what strength is costing them. Over time, their entire value becomes tied to how much they can endure. And once endurance becomes identity, suffering starts to feel like proof of love. That is a dangerous place to live. Because when a kind person is mistreated by someone they care about, the mind often cannot accept the truth immediately. This creates a painful contradiction. This person loves me, but they keep hurting me. This relationship matters, but it keeps destroying my peace. I am a good person, but I am starting to feel resentment. To reduce that inner conflict, The person may begin making excuses. They tell themselves the other person is just wounded, stressed, confused, traumatized, misunderstood. They blame timing. They blame themselves. They focus on the good memories. They keep trying to protect the image of the person, even when reality keeps breaking it. But the body remembers what the mind keeps denying. That anger you refuse to feel does not vanish. That resentment you called immature does not leave. That exhaustion you kept hiding does not become noble just because no one noticed it. It accumulates. It becomes tightness in your chest when a certain name appears on your phone. It becomes silence when you used to explain. It becomes irritation toward people you once had endless patience for. It becomes the strange feeling of being emotionally finished before you have even said goodbye. And this is where the shadow starts to speak. At first, it may not speak through rage. It may speak through numbness, through distance, through a sudden lack of interest in fixing things, through the cold realization that you no longer want to be available to everyone. And this can scare a kind person because they are not used to meeting this side of themselves. They may think, what is happening to me? Why do I not care like I used to? Why can't I feel the same warmth anymore? But Jung would say this part of you is not appearing to destroy you. It is appearing because it was ignored for too long. The shadow often carries the truths the persona could not admit. It says, you are angry. You are tired. You have been used. You have been pretending that understanding someone means tolerating them. You have been calling fear compassion. You have been calling self-abandonment loyalty. And until those truths are faced, the coldness will keep growing, because the psyche will keep trying to protect itself from the role that wounded it. So the second truth is this: kind people do not become cold only because others hurt them. They become cold because they spent too long denying the part of themselves that knew they were being hurt. The betrayal outside them awakened the betrayal inside them. The years of ignoring their own needs, silencing their own pain, and abandoning their own boundaries just to remain the kind person everyone expected. And once a person sees that, they cannot return to the old mask so easily. Because now they understand that the anger they feared was not always evil. Sometimes it was self-respect trying to return. The distance they judged was not always cruelty. Sometimes it was the soul creating space to breathe. The coldness they did not recognize was not always the death of kindness. Sometimes it was the first sign that the buried self was beginning to fight its way back to the surface. And this is where the change begins to look sudden. The kind person who used to forgive everything suddenly becomes unforgiving. The one who always answered suddenly stops replying. The one who used to explain their feelings with patience now says nothing at all. The one who once felt guilty for disappointing others may reach a point where they feel almost no guilt when they walk away. From the outside, people think this happened overnight. But from the inside, this was not sudden. It was pressure building for years. Carl Jung described a principle called enantiodromia, the idea that when something is pushed too far in one direction, it eventually turns into its opposite. The psyche tries to restore balance. If a person spends too long being endlessly kind, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, and endlessly self-sacrificing, the opposite side begins to grow in the unconscious. The more they force themselves to be good, the stronger the rejected side becomes. The more they deny anger, the more anger gathers force. The more they silence their boundaries, the more violent the need for distance becomes. So when the flip finally happens, it can feel extreme. Kindness turns into coldness. Patience turns into irritation. Forgiveness turns into distrust. The person who could not say no may suddenly begin saying no to almost everything. The person who used to give everyone the benefit of the doubt may start assuming that everyone has hidden motives. And this is not because they became evil. It is because the old personality became impossible to maintain. You can see this pattern in many parts of life. A man who spends decades as the disciplined, serious, responsible businessman may one day abandon his entire life and chase something completely opposite: art, chaos, freedom, purposelessness. Not because the new life is necessarily wise, but because the old identity became unbearable. A person who lived only through control may suddenly crave disorder. A person who lived only through duty may suddenly reject every responsibility. This is enantiodromia. The denied opposite returns. And the same thing happens to the kind person. If they spent years being the safe one, the understanding one, the reliable one, the psyche may eventually rebel against that role. Not gently, not politely, but with a kind of cold refusal. Suddenly, they no longer want to be available. They no longer want to be needed. They no longer want to listen to everyone's pain. They no longer want to carry the identity of the good person if that identity requires them to keep disappearing. This is why the coldness can feel so powerful at first. For the first time, they are not chasing. They are not explaining. They are not waiting for someone to change. They are not letting guilt pull them back into the same emotional patterns. They begin to feel a strange relief in being unreachable. They stop answering every message. They stop apologizing for their limits. They stop giving people easy access to the part of them that used to care too much. In modern language, some people call this their villain era. After years of being used, ignored, betrayed, or taken for granted, they decide they no longer want to be soft. They reject the old version of themselves. They become harder, colder, more selfish, more detached. And there is something understandable about that. Sometimes a person needs to pass through that phase just to realize how much of their life was built around pleasing others. But Jung would not call this true freedom. He would see it as the opposite extreme. Before, the person was controlled by the need to be good. Now they may become controlled by the need to never be vulnerable again. Before, they were trapped by guilt. Now they may become trapped by pride. Before, they said yes to everyone. Now they reject everyone before anyone gets close enough to hurt them. The behavior changed, but the wound may still be the one making the decisions. And maybe you have felt this in yourself. Maybe after years of understanding people, one small thing made you feel completely done. One ignored message, one repeated excuse, one apology that changed nothing. One more moment where you were expected to be patient with someone who never gave you the same patience back. And suddenly, something inside you did not want to explain anymore. You did not want to argue. You did not want to forgive. You did not even want to care. That is the pendulum swing. It is not always the size of the final betrayal that changes a person. Sometimes the final betrayal is small, but it carries the weight of every betrayal before it. And when that weight becomes too heavy, the psyche chooses distance because distance feels like the only thing that can stop the exhaustion. This is why coldness is often the mind's emergency regulation mechanism. It appears when the person no longer knows how to protect themselves in a balanced way. They could not set small boundaries, so eventually they create a wall. They could not express anger honestly, so eventually they become numb. They could not leave when the first signs appeared, so eventually they leave emotionally before they leave physically. And this is why people misunderstand the transformation. They see the coldness, but not the years of self-suppression that created it. They see the silence, but not the hundreds of explanations that were ignored before it. They see the distance, but not the closeness that was taken for granted. They see the person walk away, but not how long that person stood there waiting to be met halfway. But there is still a danger here. Because if the kind person does not understand what is happening, they may mistake the reaction for the solution. They may think the answer to being used is to trust no one. The answer to being hurt is to feel nothing. The answer to being too soft is to become permanently hard. But that is not wholeness. That is still pain controlling the personality, only from the opposite side. Before, the wound made them cling. Now, the wound makes them detach. Before, the wound made them say yes. Now, the wound makes them reject. Before, the wound made them afraid of disappointing others. Now, it makes them afraid of needing anyone at all. So Jung would say the coldness must be understood, not worshipped. It is a message from the psyche. It is saying, something has gone too far. You gave too much. You suppressed too much. You abandoned yourself for too long. But the coldness is not meant to become your final identity. It is meant to wake you up. The pendulum swing shows that the old mask could not survive. It shows that the infinite giver had reached the end of its strength. It shows that the shadow is no longer willing to stay buried. But after the swing comes the real question. Will you become whole, or will you simply become the opposite of who you used to be? And this is where the coldness becomes dangerous. Because at first, the armor feels like peace. It stops the old bleeding. It keeps the kind person away from the people who drained them, used them, guilted them, or only loved them when they were useful. For the first time, they are not explaining. They are not chasing. They are not trying to prove their pain. And after years of being emotionally overextended, that distance can feel like freedom. But if the armor stays too long, it becomes another prison. The person no longer asks, "Who is safe?" They begin assuming no one is. They no longer think, "This person hurt me." They begin thinking, "People hurt you." And this is where Jung's idea of projection becomes important. When someone has been betrayed, used, or emotionally drained, they may begin projecting the pain of one relationship onto the whole world. Every kindness starts looking suspicious. Every apology sounds like manipulation. Every request feels like another attempt to take from them. And sometimes their instincts are right. But sometimes they are not seeing the person in front of them. They are seeing the memory of what happened before. This is how the heart becomes armored. It does not only protect itself from danger, it begins protecting itself from possibility, from trust, from intimacy, from being reached by anything real. The person may say, "I am just being careful," and maybe they are. But beneath that carefulness, there may be a deeper fear. If I open again, I will become the old version of myself, the version that ignored the signs, the version that gave too much, the version that stayed too long. This is what makes the cold phase so confusing. It can contain wisdom and fear at the same time. It can protect your self-respect, but it can also protect your wounds. It can help you leave what was harming you, but it can also make you reject what might have healed you. Jung would not tell the kind person to return to blind softness, but he would also not tell them to worship their coldness. The coldness is a message. It is not meant to become the whole personality. In Jungian terms, this descent into coldness can become a kind of nekia, a descent into the inner darkness. The person goes inward, away from the world, away from the role, away from the old identity that kept them trapped. And at first, this descent may feel empty. They may feel bored with people, detached from relationships, numb toward things they once cared about. But this darkness is not always meaningless. Sometimes it is the psyche clearing space. Sometimes the old self has to die before the real self can return. But the danger is staying there. Because if the kind person stays too long inside the armored heart, they may begin to believe that distance is the same as wisdom. They may think needing no one is strength. They may mistake suspicion for intelligence and emotional numbness for peace. But often, this is still the wound controlling them. Before, the wound made them cling. Now, it makes them detach. Before, the wound made them available to everyone. Now, it makes them unavailable even to people who might be safe. The behavior changed, but the center is still pain. This is why Jung's solution is not coldness. It is individuation. Individuation means becoming whole, not becoming perfect, not becoming endlessly good, not becoming untouchable. Whole. It means you stop being possessed by one side of yourself. You are no longer only the giver, only the helper, only the forgiving one, only the patient one. But you are also not only the cold one, the distant one, the suspicious one, the person who rejects everyone before they can be hurt. You become capable of both warmth and refusal, love and distance, compassion and boundaries. This is where the kind person must integrate the rebel. The rebel is the part of them that says no, the part that refuses to be used, the part that does not automatically apologize for having needs, the part that stops asking permission to exist. For years, the kind person may have treated this part as selfish, rude, arrogant, or cruel. But in reality, this rejected part may be the exact part that was needed to keep their kindness alive. Think of someone like Elena, the kind of person who slowly merges her happiness with someone else's approval. At first, she thinks she is loving. She adapts, supports, forgives, stays quiet, keeps the peace. But eventually, she realizes she no longer knows what she wants outside of keeping the relationship stable. Her kindness has become a disappearance. Individuation begins when someone like that stops asking, "What do they need from me?" and starts asking, "What do I need to become real again?" That question changes everything, because the goal is not to stop caring. The goal is to stop disappearing. The goal is not to reject people. The goal is to stop letting other people decide which parts of you are allowed to exist. Your anger has a place, your boundaries have a place, your silence has a place, Your kindness has a place. Even your coldness has a place if you understand what it is trying to protect. But none of these parts should rule you unconsciously. This is the difference between a person who is still wounded and a person who is becoming whole. The wounded person says, "I will never let anyone close again." The whole person says, "I will let the right people close, but I will not abandon myself to keep them." The wounded person says, "I do not care anymore." The whole person says, "I care, but I choose where my care belongs." The wounded person becomes cold because they are afraid. The whole person becomes selective because they are awake. A useful way to understand this is like the mask in No Theater. The actor wears the mask, but they know they are not the mask. That is the mature relationship to the persona. You can be kind in the world. You can be patient, gentle, warm, helpful, loving, but you no longer confuse the role with your entire identity. You know when to wear the mask, and you know when to take it off. You can give without becoming the infinite giver. You can love without becoming someone else's emotional possession. And when this begins to happen, something inside becomes ordered again. Jung often connected symbols like the mandala with psychic wholeness, a center forming in the middle of inner chaos. That is what individuation feels like. The person is no longer scattered between pleasing others and rejecting everyone. They begin to find a center, a place inside themselves that says, "I can be kind without being naive. I can be guarded without being closed. I can forgive without reopening every door. I can love without becoming a sacrifice." This is the true transformation. The kind person does not need to return to who they were before. That version had warmth, but no guardian, and they do not need to remain cold forever. That version has protection, but no openness. The deeper path is to become someone who can hold both, the warmth that makes them human and the strength that keeps them from being consumed. Because real maturity is not being endlessly available, it is not being emotionally frozen, it is knowing how far you can go without losing yourself. It is knowing when your kindness is love and when it has become fear. It is knowing when your coldness is wisdom and when it has become armor. And maybe that is the gift hidden inside the coldness. It was never meant to erase your heart. It was meant to show you that your heart needed protection. It was meant to reveal that being good is not enough if goodness requires self-betrayal. It was meant to lead you toward a self that is no longer split between the person everyone needs and the person you have been suppressing. The goal was never to become cruel. The goal was to become whole enough that your kindness is finally a choice. So if you became cold after giving too much, maybe it was not because your kindness died. Maybe it was because something deeper inside you finally refused to keep disappearing. But do not let pain turn your heart into a prison. The goal is not to become unreachable. The goal is to become whole, kind without being used, loving without being consumed, forgiving without losing yourself. Because the kindest people do not become cold because they are weak. They become cold when the part of them that was ignored for too long finally asks to be protected. And if this video made you see yourself differently, subscribe.